Hello, this is Mike Bithell, creator of Thomas Was Alone and John Wick Hex, and you're listening to the Xbox Expansion Pass.
Welcome one, welcome all to episode 146 of the Xbox Expansion Pass, recorded on Sunday, September 18th, 2022. I am your host, Luke Lohr, the InsipidGhost. In this episode, we're joined by the Grand Curator of the Game Mess, Mr. Jeff Grubb, and we'll be chatting about this past week's second E3-esque slew of announcements thanks to a PlayStation State of Play, Nintendo Direct, and Xbox's version of a Tokyo Game Show. Lots of cross-platform news hitting the gamerverse in this one. Enjoy. Yet another week of gaming is upon us and behind us. Welcome to XEP, discussing all things in the gamerverse as they pertain to the Xbox ecosystem. And as I want to do each and every week, I like to start the show by offering words of kindness to those who have made my gaming week better. And this week, the words of kindness are extended to Mr. Jeff Grubb, my guest, who was patient enough to wait a week while I got over the corona. Jeff Grubb, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Luke.
I'm so ecstatic to have you on. I think this is the third time you've been on XEP.
That sounds right. Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, so much joy when you come on. You've been rocking and rolling in your own content creation space, man. How are things?
Busy. Yeah, I've been going. Been doing a lot. It's been nice though. It's cool to have all these different avenues to talk about the stuff that I really enjoy, and been fun kind of trying to figure out new ways of doing things and reaching people. Been trying to, we moved. We had a big move across the country. I'm trying to make some big life changes where I'm like, maybe I can let my wife have a few years off because I got to work from home for years. I got to be with the kids, and so we're trying to work that out. And so I'm like, well, I'll do a little bit more, and I don't mind so much. So yeah, it's been fun trying to figure that out, and so far it's been going pretty well.
How's the grind changed for you though over the last few months? Like, what's the difference between where you were and where you are now?
The big difference is that I feel like when I was writing news stories, it was a little bit more abstract to see the immediate response to stuff where I would put some work into something and I would put it out there on, gamesbeat.com, and people would show up to it. People might start talking about it. But it wasn't like, okay, now I'm engaged in an active conversation with people. With the doing more video stuff, it's been much more, okay, I can, people seem more engaged. I feel like I'm in more control of the response to it, where like I can hop right into the comments or whatever, and there's a lot more people who engage with the stuff, so that helps. And also just the concept of the way, we do things over at Giant Bomb, and honestly, the way I do things on my own is I come up with an idea and I'm trying to execute it really quickly. We're just, we're going to come up with an idea we can handle here in the next day and get it done, get it put out there. And that can be a little bit different than like writing a big story that requires a lot of reporting. And I'm still doing that stuff. I'm just like letting it inform the conversations that we're having on the podcast. And that fits a little bit better with the way I do things. So the grind is actually much more manageable. It was for a while there, it was like, okay, just trying to keep up with the news. Oh, I've done all this work on one thing I thought was really important, and now 25 news stories have come out since then. I feel, I did all this work, and now I feel so behind on everything, and that was pretty frustrating after a while.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a nice change so far. I'm sure I'll find things I don't like about it eventually, but right now it's been all positive.
Sure, dude, that's awesome. Do you find that you have to play the game differently? And like my mind, I was just doing a thumbnail prior to the show. Like I have to adjust thumbnails, as cure SEO and people click and stuff. Do you have to play the game differently from VentureBeat GamesBeat to where you are rocking now?
Yeah, I mean, yes. And it's a lot of that's just figuring stuff out, like what works, what doesn't. But yeah, a little bit. I mean, at Giant Bomb, we can kind of get away with doing some stuff just kind of however we want, but we also are like trying to be mindful of growing and finding new people, and that requires us to play the game of whatever platform that we are engaging with at that moment. But like, I was, I made a big mistake with the Twilight Princess Wind Waker stuff this past week. And I'm like, you know what? I know a lot of people don't actually listen to me firsthand to get that information. And I know a lot of them are reading headlines or going to forums and getting stuff kind of, through the game of telephone, which I would say is out of context, but that implies that like things weren't accurate. It just feels like, they're not getting the full context.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, okay, how can I reach the most of those people in the easiest way? I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to do an I'm sorry YouTube video. I know those things always kind of get some traffic. So I'll do that. I'll explain exactly what happened, but it won't be, no muss, no fuss. And, I made the thumbnail with my face and the big words and everything like that. And the goal of that was to reach this audience who wouldn't normally be watching. So I am thinking more actively about the way that these platforms work and the way that the way you can have success on them. But so far it's like not using them, not going into it with like, okay, what can I do to, clickbait people, I guess, but whatever. If people click on it, I guess I don't care. If it works, it works.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, it's got to be strange to tie your livelihood in some ways and be
Yeah.
subject to this algorithm that we all try to dance with, even though we may not all like it, but you need it. That balance is tough.
Yeah, it's really trying to make it clear to the people who are watching that we're not thinking about the algorithm first. We're thinking about them first. I always said I was writing for my readers. Now I'm in an active conversation with my listeners and viewers and readers, and I am thinking about them first still. So that's where all the content. That's like the heart of the content, and then if we could do some extra mustard on top to get some extra growth on top of that by thinking about the algorithm. Yeah, we will do that, but that's not where any of the ideas are coming from.
Gotcha. Makes sense, man. Makes sense. Well, we appreciate what you do, dude. I think you've become an important part of the gaming industry. Sometimes by way of that telephone, which may be frustrating, but I appreciate the work you put in, man. It definitely.
Yeah, it is what it is. Yeah, I'm all good with it. Yep.
Awesome. Well, I've got questions for you later on in the show. You will have to talk about your hair regimen. I think that happens every time.
Yep, of course, we'll do it.
TP.
Yep.
But this past week, man, we had multiple gaming shows. It felt to me like a second E3. I was so busy at work that every time I pulled up my feed for just a little bit of respite, I was seeing real game news, like actual things were happening, not speculations. It was wild. I think I'll go to what was perhaps the most muted of the shows, given that we had a PlayStation State of Play, we had a Nintendo Direct, but somewhere buried in there was Xbox's Tokyo Game Show presentation. Blaze Knight wrote in on this one. He said, what do we make of the recent ID at Xbox and Tokyo Game Show events? I've heard nobody else talk about these shows so far. I kind of agree with him, Jeff. I mean, there was a lot of cool stuff in there. Updates on 22 Xbox Game Studio games. We had news of 13 games from developers in Japan, 2 in China. Talked a lot about ID at Xbox, Deathloop news coming, but it really was a muted presence, I thought.
Yeah, I think there was reasons to get expectations a little bit up as we were going into it. Like Phil Spencer is going to be doing the intro or hosting it or whatever, and it's like, okay, we know he's got Kojima. Maybe they could show, and Kojima keeps teasing stuff. Maybe he'll have something, like he'll show his game or whatever. And so there was reasons to have high expectations, and then coming out of it's like, oh, okay. I like it happened like 5 a.m. my time, and I was up late the night before streaming, so I didn't watch it live.
Mm-hmm.
I caught up on it later, and from what I can tell from that, it was like, it was a small showcase that mostly was positioned as, here's why Japan should care about Game Pass, and hey, I hope they care. It's a good service that I think a lot of gamers there could get a lot of use out of. But it's also, well, we know that dance. Is there that much to be excited about? We knew Deathloop was coming. We all knew. I guess it's nice to have it confirmed that it's coming to Game Pass, because it seemed like maybe there's a chance the contracts could get in the way there. Well, they didn't. So great. It's coming to Game Pass. A handful of other stuff, some Ni no Kuni stuff. It's that's nice, but also it still feels like this is not the tip of the spear for Microsoft convincing anyone to be making moves one way or the other, or to let you know that this is what you're going to be playing for the future. It's a reminder about why you should be happy about Game Pass, and that's welcome. But for the most part, it's not going to stand up to when Nintendo and Sony are doing their own showcases.
Right. For me, it was a lot of clarity. With all of the Jim Ryan quotes, the discussions about exclusivity and such, I really did wonder about Deathloop. And then it's like, oh, nothing nothing bad there. It was just a marketing deal why they didn't talk about it, and they wanted to talk about it at a game show. Here we go. September 20th, Xbox gamers are playing Deathloop, no problem. And I thought the announcements of, like, to your point, Ni no Kuni getting the remaster, Danganronpa 3 coming to Game Pass, seeing, several other like smaller titles on some of the ID at Xbox stuff, it felt to me like, all right, Xbox is still doing its thing. It's trying to gain a presence in Japan. I felt good after looking over the announcements, watching some of the trailers and such, but it didn't feel groundbreaking in any way.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. There was a lot of reasons to be happy with what you saw, and I think I'm like, hey, Deathloop's got extra stuff. I might play that again. I might play it on my Steam Deck, but hey, it's there on Game Pass if I need it. That's great. But we are also still waiting for that other shoe to drop, where 2023 is right here. It's the make or break year, I think, for a lot of these acquisitions, or it's the first make or break year. And we know we got Starfield. We know we got Redfall coming. Let's get those, but we should be talking about games already that are coming out beyond those two. And a lot of those games have been announced, and we haven't seen much from them in, at this point, years in some cases. So the expectations for Microsoft are still pretty high to show that stuff, at least if we're not, announcing new games. And they didn't happen here. I guess, was anyone expecting them to happen at Tokyo Game Show? Not really. I wasn't. But the potential is always there. Phil Spencer on stage. What could happen? And for the most part, I'll say with Microsoft, it doesn't feel like these events can ever be anything can happen. We have pretty set expectations for what is possible at an event at Tokyo Game Show from Xbox, and what we got was well within those ramifications, or well within those specifications. What we are, where can we expect to get stuff like that? Well, E3 for sure, and then maybe the Game Awards, and if there's like an XO ever, maybe something like that. So like twice, 3 times a year, maybe. And this is just not going to be one of those.
You mentioned Game Awards, and that's consistently on my mind because, to your point, we know so much about Xbox's slate upcoming in the next few years. They've got so many games announced that there seems to be very little mystery about what the current Xbox game studios are working on. And so I'm like, all right, what do they have that we don't know that they could surprise us with other than gameplay, right? And so I'm curious about that. The inevitable, like, are they going to acquire something new, which to my way of thinking, I can't imagine we see new acquisitions thanks to the Activision deal and not wanting to disturb that process. But yeah, Game Awards seems to be the only place where we might see something out of Xbox that's fresh and exciting on a AAA level with respect to Pentiment here in 2022.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is we just might not get very many new game announcements for things we haven't heard of before for some time now. I mean, there's no reason. They could still have stuff like that in the works. They could, and I'm sure they do. I mean, you look at like a company like Nintendo, they have like half the studios. They do a lot of partnerships outside externally for third-party companies coming in and working on first-party games that get published by Nintendo. Excuse me. And that's something Microsoft could do more of. And maybe like the underlying story of what's happening with Tokyo Game Show is Phil Spencer's in Japan. He's having conversations on the ground. This is going beyond laying the groundwork. They've laid the groundwork for a long time now. This is maybe building the scaffolding on top of what they've done before to say, hey, let's build an infrastructure here in Japan where we can get some more partnerships, where these companies could feel better about putting games out, at least on Xbox simultaneously as PlayStation and Switch. And then maybe even go beyond that. Let's get some people that can come in and, hey, maybe you could work out some of our IP. Maybe, we could hire you to come work on a first party game as a third party external contractor. That would be cool. But in the meantime, it would probably be unwise for a Microsoft outside of the E3 context to be talking about games that haven't been announced before, because they have so many they haven't delivered yet. They need to get Perfect Dark out, Avowed, Hellblade. They have to at least get a couple of those out and start building a track record before you make new promises. I think not many people are in the mood for a new promise right now.
I'm inclined to agree. We consistently get this question from Captain Logan on this show about, is it better to have the Sony strategy of buy the game's exclusivity, buy the game's marketing rights, versus what Xbox seems to be doing with buy the studio, buy the publisher? And my answer to that one is, Well, it's better to get the game in the short term because at the moment, none of the things that Xbox has purchased have produced on an exclusive level for their platform. And so I'm kind of in that boat as well. Until they start producing the games for their audience and they start coming out in cadence, it feels like the strategy doesn't need more added to it.
Yeah, I mean, we're operating on different timelines than what Microsoft's doing, right? We have gamer needs right now. We have expectations that we're setting right now. And Microsoft is thinking 10, 15 years down the line. And so I think you're right. In the short term, those timed exclusive deals seem to be really working out for Sony. I think that if you are looking ahead to another generation and to the shifts in the tectonic shifts that could happen in the marketplace, and trying to be the one that can shape those shifts, you do what Microsoft's doing, and that's what we're getting. So but that means, okay, well, while we wait, as people who might be playing games on an Xbox, all right, what's next? Now it's a little bit frustrating for Microsoft because, hey, they're going to be saying we're putting out a lot of good games. Some of them are exclusive to PlayStation for a year, and that's frustrating. But these games are well regarded in many cases, and then other games are like, yeah, we're Metacritic's Publisher of the Year and all that stuff. Now, and how much that really matter if those games aren't for you that they're putting out? It doesn't matter at all. But this is a company that is thinking on a different timeline. I think what's going to happen in 2023 is those timelines are going to begin to sync up, where we want games now. They want a guarantee that their future can be, they could be very powerful in the gaming industry in the future, so that when tastes and ways people access games do begin to shift, they're like, hey, we have Game Pass, here's the cloud, here's all this other stuff ready to go for anyone who might be coming in new and deciding who their loyalties are going to lie with for the next 30 years. They can shape that. But we also are getting the games as part of that argument. And I hope that 2023 is that. I expect it to be, even if all the games that I originally heard were scheduled for 2023 don't end up coming out, which is, of course, very likely.
Do you think, and I will tag you on that games that you heard question in a minute, but do you think had Halo and Forza perhaps delivered on what they were hoping, maybe in terms of genuine interest in gameplay and concurrent players, Steam lists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, do you think if those games had delivered, people would be as frustrated with the lack of output from Xbox? And I use that with an asterisk, given that Xboxes are still selling out, excitement's still a buzz around a lot of Xbox platforms. I mean, like there's still plenty to play, and people are playing it. But do you think if those two games had delivered on the level that Microsoft was perhaps hoping, we would still be perhaps as frustrated with this year in terms of output?
I think the sting would be taken off, even if I think we would still be a little frustrated. I think that it's a very "what have you done for me lately" thing. Like looking over at Nintendo, they had Animal Crossing that one year, and then not much came out after. But a lot of people are like, "Hey, we have Animal Crossing." But if you talk to people who weren't into Animal Crossing and are big Nintendo fans, they would tell you there hasn't actually been anything for me for a really long time. And so it's like, even when you have a big game, people are still going to be saying, hey, what's next? So to be in that situation and then also be like feeling like many people aren't happy with your most recent output, that stings extra hard. So it would help. But the reality is, and Microsoft clearly knows this because it talks about wanting to be in this situation, and it has obviously built its internal studio infrastructure to deliver on this. It wants to have that regular cadence of one big game per quarter, if not more. And it's not there yet. And it was probably never going to be there by like the early part of 2022. But you could feel like, hey, in the second half of 2022, after all that work, and even counting some of the games that had those previous contracts, like Deathloop, by the end of 2022, they should be hitting it. And that was going to be what was going to happen with Starfield and Redfall. And that didn't work out. So now it's been pushed into 2023. But now coming out of 2023 or going into 2023 and then coming out of it, if they are not on that regular cadence, something else is going on. And then it's like they need to be, I mean, obviously development is still as tough as ever, and getting talent is as tough as ever. You see what happens with Halo, and you're like, well, this is the biggest franchise at one of the biggest corporations in the history of the universe. And they keep saying that they need to move resources around because they want to focus on other parts of the game. Well, don't you have essentially infinite resources? And so it turns out, time, physics, and human labor hours don't work that way. They can only get so much talent because talent keeps moving around and finding better, greener pastures and moving around. And so you lose this institutional knowledge that gets taken along with these people. And now you've got great people coming up, but now you got to spend a lot of time training them or giving them time to find their footing. And in the meantime, Halo is languishing. So it's a tough business right now, and I get it, but they need to be on that cadence. That is actually the right way of doing things, especially if you are putting your games out as part of a subscription service. So in the meantime, while everyone is sort of antsy and anxious and a little bit unhappy, there's not much to do about that other than put out a game.
Mm-hmm. I'm inclined to agree on all levels there. You did mention things that you'd heard were originally going to be happening in 2022. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, in 2023, yeah. It's they had a bunch of games on the docket in from 2021 through 2022 of what they expected to be in 2023. This is just like their internal schedule, and it definitely is subject to change. It was games like Avowed, Fable, Perfect Dark, Everwild's Hellblade 2, Contraband, and Exile's next game, and Compulsion's next game. Oh, and the Coalition non-Gears project that they were working on. I mean,
all that in that window? That's a lot of AAA.
It's a lot, but immediately just reading that list that some of those don't pass the smell tests. Everwilds is not coming out next year. There's no way. Now, of those games, I do think Hellblade 2 has a strong chance of coming out in the second half of next year, but also it could easily get pushed into 2024. And Avowed, Fable, Perfect Dark, Contraband. I mean, who's to say? All of those seem possible, and at the same time, all of them seem like they could take another couple of years. Especially Contraband, one we haven't seen really much from at all. And then Compulsion, I guess that one does seem likely since it's been so long since Compulsion's next game, and I guess the same goes for the Coalition's next game. But the Coalition is so busy working on everyone else's stuff that maybe they won't be ready. So there's a lot possible. And I suppose with Starfield and Redfall going into 2023, really what you need is like 2 of these games to fill out the second half of the year. And if you get to that point, then we're hitting 1 game per quarter on average at least. Mm-hmm. And they've delivered on their promise. And let's see how everyone feels about that. Let's see if that feels like enough. My guess is it probably still won't feel quite like enough because not every single one of those games is going to hit with every single person. Right. But it's going to be a lot closer and a lot better than what they're doing now. And the conversation could turn to, well, this game's not for me, instead of, well, there's no games at all to choose from, period. Mm-hmm. And of course, we speak in hyperbole about that stuff. Obviously, there are games on Game Pass and games coming out from third party, and why people only care about first party is a little bit, bewildering, but whatever. I think a lot of these games do move, and in the meantime, if a couple come out, I'd be very happy to see what it feels like to have Microsoft begin delivering on this experiment in wholeheartedly.
If you're a betting man, which one from that list that you gave does come out in 2023 next to Redfall and Starfield?
Hellblade 2 is probably number 1 on the list, and then probably Compulsion's game, I would say, and then maybe In Exile's next game. I think that those 3 seem like there's a strong chance. And then of like the ones that have titles beyond all that, between Avowed, Fable, Perfect Dark, and I'm not counting Everwild's there. So I think probably Fable, even though that seems like it could just take forever as well. So yeah,
I always worry about cannibalization. I felt like just with the scheduling, Forza had this massive excitement around it. It was the first Xbox exclusive in so long. And then Halo drops, and everybody seems to have publicly forgotten about Forza. I'm sure the player base is doing quite well. But I worry about that with so many RPGs. Like, do you want an Avowed experience near a Starfield? That kind of thing. That is something that consistently kind of floats through my mind as we see some of these bigger AAA titles. Some of them seem to look very similar in terms of genre, and I worry about cannibalization between the two.
Yeah, it's... I think that is something that it's easy to worry about from the outside. I think internally, Microsoft is probably looking at data and seeing that it doesn't necessarily work that way, especially because their business model is one cohesive subscription service. You know, in a world where you're forcing your customers to choose between spending $60 on this or $60 on that, spacing things out probably made a lot of sense, and it ensured that you were maximizing your relationship to the customer's wallet. And I'm sure that's very important. But when you are trying to get a subscription service going, it's all additive at a certain point. At a certain point, having Halo right next to Forza is a double whammy that makes it easy to pull the trigger on the subscription service. Now, do you keep it around? Well, that's sort of a different fight, keeping people happy over time. And it's a lot easier to win that battle than it is to get someone to subscribe in the first place. So I think putting a couple of big games right next to each other is probably a viable strategy for something like this. Now, these are games in many cases that do have long ongoing support and live service stuff, and then subscription, in-game microtransactions and stuff like that. And that's definitely a concern if the one game is pulling away players from another game that might have been spending money on that one. And, it's a little unfair to them, maybe. But I don't think that's not the primary concern right now. A big live service game that can succeed with an audience is sort of going to find its way regardless of those hurdles, because, a person picking their forever game is looking for that in a very specific way. And another game coming out is probably not going to distract them too much. So I think this is something that Microsoft is aware of and is not too worried about, even though from the outside, I know people like, when we talk about TV, people are like, I love weekly releases because it's like I have something to do every week and spread stuff out. And I think it might feel nice, and people might like the feeling of a structured schedule of things coming out, and they're spread out, and it gives you a little space to enjoy things. And like that probably does some nice things for people's well-being in terms of taking on media and taking on a lot of media because we're so overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. I would wager that internally, when you look at the data, especially for something like TV, there's a reason Netflix keeps doing things the way Netflix has been doing things. And it's because it works and gets a lot of subscribers, and they're going to keep doing that. And I think that Microsoft probably sees the same thing.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about the idea of getting somebody in as a new customer, because in my mind, it was consistently like, don't let this audience eat that audience. But you make a very good point in a way that I hadn't considered of, well, if I have two major big releases near each other, I can spend $60 and get at Game Pass for X amount of time, and then I'm going to keep resubscribing versus, not wanting to cannibalize. That's a really, really good point. And I have something to think about now. That's neat. So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. Anytime.
To round out just a little bit of the Tokyo Game Show, I just want to share, because it was asked, some of the ID at Xbox stuff that came out. Over 250 Japanese creators have games coming to Xbox, and of that, let's see, let me make sure I read this properly. These teams have already released 150 games onto Xbox, and they gave some examples of that. That's pretty cool to think about on a small level. Jeff, Rune Telvik wrote in and asked, with all this talk about Japanese games on Xbox, will there ever be a Lost Odyssey 2 remake of the original? And what happened to Mistwalker in the first place? How come they didn't put out more games on Xbox? I think the bigger question here, Jeff, is will we see any of that original Japanese push from the 360 era? Any of those games ever going to come back?
I think there's a chance. That was a different Microsoft, a different initiative. But that doesn't mean that there's no love for those games. I think there's a chance that something like a Lost Odyssey or a Blue Dragon could eventually make their way back. And get sequels possibly. I think that in those situations it would be built out of what Phil is doing right now, inviting Japanese creators into the Microsoft fold in a really strong way. And who knows, maybe it does end up making a deal with say, hey, does this new studio create made up of former developers on massive RPG franchises who are looking for work? You want to come work on Blue Dragon 2, and maybe we'll get the Mistwalker involved in some ways, and you could be the team, and Sakaguchi can come in and be like executive producer or something like that. All that seems on the table right now. I don't necessarily know if anything like that's going to happen, but it seems like not out of the realm of possibility. I think more likely though is people in Japan are going to look to the Kojima deal. They're going to look to Phil and Kojima hanging out, and they're going to see money, and they're going to see security and fair deals, and a creator being able to do whatever he wants with the power of Microsoft behind him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's going to attract some development talent that want to say, hey, listen, putting out games on Switch is great, but Nintendo's sort of hands off in terms of cultivating us, and Sony seems to have sort of grown a little bit detached from both Japan and indie games. And so if we're like growing up in that space and now we're ready to take on the next challenge, do we really want to be trying to fight for that attention? And if we're going to get, a direct line to Phil Spencer, the head over here, maybe we could make some gains and do something special over here. Now, that's going to be few and far between. Most people in a market are going to keep doing what they've done before. But I think that there are going to be some incremental improvements to the relationship between Xbox and Japanese games. Now, not Xbox and Japanese gamers necessarily. That's a longer fight that will probably, it has improved a little bit, obviously, this generation, but it's not going to like suddenly be day and night over there. But that doesn't mean you can't get all the advantages of having a strong relationship with Japanese developers. That can help you globally, and Microsoft fully gets that. And Phil Spencer said as much.
Good stuff. In that you mentioned Nintendo briefly, and I do want to bring out the Xbox adjacent news that came by way of the Nintendo Direct, and that is Goldeneye 007 is back, but it is back weirdly. Jeff, this is so par for the course, I think, when you look at Nintendo and Xbox together. Xbox Game Pass is getting GoldenEye 64, but it's coming back with an improved refresh rate, a 4K experience. It looks like it's been remastered, if that's the right word for it. I'm not 100% sure if that's the right word for it. But on the and it will not have online multiplayer. However, on the Nintendo Switch side, you get a fully emulated version of the N64 experience. It will not look as good. It will not play as well, given to that refresh rate. However, it will have online, but it will be an emulated online, meaning that you will watch all 4 players on a single screen despite playing online. What a weird, cool, but weird announcement.
Yeah, it's especially weird given the context that there is a fully complete Xbox Live Arcade actual remaster of GoldenEye sitting on Xbox servers that has leaked out and people have played and have seen is hella done. It's super finished, ready to go. It got made for the Xbox 360. Rare did it themselves, and then Nintendo put the kibosh on it and said, no, we're not going to actually put this. We're not going to let you put this out. And so that it just got abandoned. It's weird that they wouldn't just let Microsoft take that version and put it out, but it seems like that's what happened. Now, I don't think we know for sure, but it seems like Nintendo just said, we don't want you to have such a better version of this game on your thing. So what we will say is you can have the ROM and you could do the emulator thing that you did with Rare Replay, and good luck. And that sucks. It's silly. Nintendo should be less weird about this stuff, but it's Nintendo, so they're weird about this stuff. And it means the rest of us don't get the best possible version of GoldenEye that we could have gotten in a better world. That online multiplayer that is going to be on the Switch version, it is something I probably will play a couple times, but it's just the overall tunneling software that they use to make everything online for a Nintendo Switch online game. Any 2-player game is like they're not patching in online multiplayer, like you said. This is just emulated stuff, so it's gonna be a weird. It's gonna be a weird thing, and most people are probably not going to end up doing much with that. As opposed to if they were to put out that GoldenEye remaster from Xbox natively on Xbox One and Series X and S and all that stuff, I think a lot of people would have had a good couple of weeks with that, where it's like, oh man, a lot of people are playing this. This is fun. Just like what happened when Perfect Dark got the same treatment.
Yeah, no, that's exactly how I feel. But I always worry, because I grant to any listener that might be new or is unfamiliar with me, it is an Xbox show. This is the Xbox Expansion Pass. And so I try to be wary of playing for the home team, I suppose. But to my way of thinking, I feel like Xbox gamers got the better end of this deal, given that they got the refresh rate improved up from whatever it was. Goodness, it was low, but it was a 64 game, right? Like I feel like they're getting the better visuals, better experience, and I don't think anyone's going to really enjoy that online multiplayer. To your point, am I playing for the home team? Am I being a little too like rah rah on the Xbox side there?
No, I think this is fair. I mean, what's happening here is, you're questioning your like the home team bias while at the same time, butting up against a weird company, Nintendo, doing things for no obviously good reason. Just weird Nintendo decisions that you normally don't have to deal with. Well, now they're coming into the sphere and messing things up, and I think it's completely fair to be like, "What is even like? This just seems stupid." And you are right.
Okay. All right. Well, it's good to hear. I'm glad because, I'm always conscious of that. I enjoy gaming on all platforms, but, I make an Xbox show and I want to be, cognizant of that because it can certainly benefit me to if something great comes to my console of choice. And I will say, I'm glad this is coming to Game Pass because I'm worried if I'd spent money on it and it wasn't the nostalgic experience I wanted it to be, that'd feel disappointment. That makes sense?
Yeah, I think that's fair because it's you really, what do you want from Goldeneye at this point? It's not something that is ever gonna, like, they tried to bring it back a bunch of times, and recapturing that magic never really worked when it was a new form, like a new thing that was just called Goldeneye. And so I'm kind of over them trying that. At this point, having everyone going back and checking in on that original ROM or whatever, sure, that works for me.
Cool. Cool. Well, just a little bit of news coming more out of the Tokyo Game Show. Phil Spencer reiterated that Microsoft has no plans for a price hike on the Series S or X. This came after concerns of after PlayStation did it in some territories. Nintendo said they wouldn't do it. Xbox has reiterated they won't. So fear not, Xbox fans. If you're still trying to get a box, the price is not going up. Something interesting happened this past week, Jeff, that it raised my eyebrows given all the discussion surrounding Halo, and that's that Bonnie Ross is now out as head of 343 Industries after 15 years. I say out, and people's minds may jump to any conclusions there. However, it was stated that in an announcement she made on Twitter, she's departing earlier than expected, which means she was expecting to leave.
Right.
Due to a family medical issue, and that raises eyebrows. I think people were questioning whether or not that's true, not in the sense that there's a family concern, but given the structure of Halo's frustrating releases, the brand overall, what's been happening with Infinite, I think people are asking questions, and I think it's fair to ask questions. But with Bonnie Ross leaving, she certainly stewarded a lot of Halo content in the last 15 years. The Master Chief Collection ended up on track by the end. There is a show, multiple projects, books. Like there's a lot that happened with Halo. Bonnie Ross leaving, good, bad? What are your thoughts? I have mine, but tell me yours first, please.
It's probably time for a change. I think that they needed to do something, and how many options do you really have other than, I mean, they're not going to nuke the studio or the projects that they're working on or the games that are active right now. So you're going to keep these things moving forward. So then, under those circumstances, like what can you really shift around? Well, you can ask the people who are in charge to make some changes, and I bet that's already happened. And I bet it's made some improvements, but is it enough? It feels like what's happened is that there weren't enough improvements. So the discussions were, hey, Bonnie, at a certain point coming up, we're probably going to look to make some leadership changes. And then she was like, listen, I already got shit going on in my personal life. Let's just dip now. I'd rather be taking care of them than this. And I think that's completely fair. Of course, this is speculation, and I hope, it goes without saying that, all respect to Bonnie and going to take care of someone who's sick in your family. That rises above everything else. And so all of this discussions about video game stuff, if you think, well, this doesn't really matter, I agree. But that's the show. That's what we're talking about here. That's our jobs. So we are going to talk about the game side of stuff at the same time. I think that it's Bonnie Ross, and then a couple of days later, right, a few days later, they said the head of technology at 343 is also leaving. So it seems like they are saying, okay, we're going to bring in fresh leadership and maybe people who understand, because a lot of it was like people from within the studio got moved up. Maybe these are people who are more aware of what the problems are and what would be required to change, what would need to change to fix those issues. And hopefully that's the case. That would be the reason I would be making these changes. I kind of hope that's what's happening here. And that's kind of what Halo needs right now. It needs sort of a little bit of kick in the ass to get up and get at them on fixing these issues with a little bit more urgency than what we felt so far. And I'm sure part of that is the Microsoft's pretty hardline stance against a lot of crunch. And I hope that doesn't change, but it still feels like they could be doing more while not killing their developers, of course.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's a lot to break down within that. I'm of the mind as well that family first. I think all the best to Bonnie Ross. Like, goodness gracious, if I ever met Bonnie Ross, I would be so inclined to shake her hand, give her a hug, thank her for the work she's done in Halo, because I love that franchise. And I think it's good also to have fresh blood, fresh ideas, leading a studio that did have a troubled launch with their game. I think it's a miracle Halo Infinite came out and was as playable as it was. There's a lot of really good gameplay there. I love the story that they're doing. I think there's more to be had there. The problem, I think, ultimately is that if you're going to have a live service game, you need content faster. And I don't want to see and hear about Halo crunching at all. I don't want 343 to do that. Similarly, you must be able to compete in a market where live service is live service. And if that means resources shifting around, or avoiding bottlenecks, getting more people on a project, I think it was time for Halo to have that shift. And this is I want to use the word graceful. This is a graceful way to let some of those changes happen.
Yeah.
With the caveat of, I'm hoping that it's not I hope the family emergency is not so dire that there's no way to celebrate the legacy.
Right, agreed. Like, there was a lot of good work done. They took on some challenging stuff, and a lot of people remember the bad stuff that happened with Halo under 343. But there was a lot of W's too. There was a lot of stuff that people really, really like, and if you put all those things together, it's a pretty impressive legacy for Bonnie Ross and that team. So hopefully in the future they could build on that stuff and really just emphasize all that good stuff and make a lot more of it. That's all anyone really wants.
Agreed. And I shout out to any listener to recognize those W's, as Jeff said, because Halo 4 was magic on an Xbox 360. That was just absurd how good it was. The multiplayer in Halo 5, absolutely wonderful. The reconstruction of the Master Chief Collection really, at the end of the day, did something special. It launched poorly, but did something special. And we're seeing that with so many games now where they launch in a frustrating state due to any number of reasons, and then studios stick with it, and they could have easily abandoned it. And for all intents and purposes, Halo Infinite, extremely fun, very playable game. Certainly there's content missing, and they've got stuff coming, but my excitement for Halo, while frustrated right now, it exists nonetheless. And so I'm hopeful that
same. It's such a fun game, and it's just a couple of hurdles they need to get over with the content, and if they could do that, they'll be back in business in no time.
Are you expecting anything to come out by way of them in terms of content soon? Like, whether it's DLC, whether it's that rumored battle royale? Have you heard anything on that front?
I've not, and so I'm at a point where I'm not expecting too much, just because I feel like every time I do that, it's usually a pretty big letdown. I think that they could still surprise us, but I don't think anytime this year. They're going to pretty much stick to their established roadmap, and then maybe they'll have like a big surprise early next year or something like that. We'll have to wait and see.
I was really I'm frustrated to hear that on some levels, because I want more Halo content. However, with the recent news of Call of Duty and what they're doing with Modern Warfare 2 coming out in November 16th, Warzone 2 is going to be out, new map, new weapons, DMZ mode, which brings in PvE elements to their PvP structuring, third-person multiplayer. Dude, I'm super excited for Call of Duty this year in a way that I haven't been in several years. I don't know if it's fatigue from Halo, or I'm just ready to be excited for Call of Duty again. I don't know if it's the Activision Blizzard deal, but best for Halo to stay out of the way, I think, in this fall, and just take the L for the lack of content that they've had, and let Call of Duty have its moment. Because to my way of thinking, there's a lot of good stuff on the horizon for Call of Duty, a franchise that's struggled on its terms in the last few years.
Yeah, it's I think there's a strong chance Call of Duty's going to have a great couple of months, and people have been playing that beta. I played that beta. So people seem to like it. There's some issues, but for the most part, it seems like stuff that can get tweaked out. It's not like lack of content or something like that would be difficult to address. If anything, Call of Duty has too much content. They have so much happening. So I think you're right. Like, get out of the way of that, and then you have 2023 coming up, and you could start really re-ramping up. A little bit into next year, and then by the end of next year, if you're putting out some really big stuff when there isn't going to be a Call of Duty apparently, then yeah, that's I mean, there's going to be huge updates to Warzone 2 and all this other stuff, so you're going to have to watch out for that. But that's going to be better than trying to compete against the room filling noise that is going to be Call of Duty here in a couple of weeks.
I had a good chuckle this past week when I took a step back and looked at Jim Ryan's comments about the inadequacy of the Activision deal, and then follow it like 2 days later. We have the exclusive beta for PlayStation launching 2 weeks or a week or so ahead of the Xbox side of things, while Deathloop was getting cleared to come out on Xbox as it exited PlayStation exclusivity. That was a game that wouldn't have existed if not for PlayStation money at one point, and then Xbox purchased that one, and then Deathloop's going to come to Game Pass. It was this funny tit for tat back and forth, and Call of Duty kind of at the center of it as it gets this exclusive beta, or a timed exclusive beta. I don't know how you want to word that, but it was coming to PlayStation first. I just had a grin and a chuckle at the lunacy of the gaming industry in that front.
Yes, it's like there are so many clauses on top of clauses, and so much of the way that these companies behave is dictated by lawyers. I mean, it's an entertainment medium, it's an artistic medium. It's it's got big blockbusters. It's this thing that it's this massive vehicle for making money. It's all run by lawyers when it comes down to it. At the end of the day, this is an industry that is shaped and crafted, and the decisions are made by lawyers in small rooms having conversations for a couple of days. And the weird things that end up in their contracts is how all these giant corporations have to behave and the things they have to abide by. It's a weird business.
It is. It really is. Not too far from that, but a little bit separate. James Suddy wrote in asking about Call of Duty and realism and escaping realism, and my mind jumps to the old Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 on this one, given the no Russian moment. But he asks, there's a COD clip going around of Modern Warfare 2 showing the eastern United States getting nuked. Given the state of the world, is that too far in gaming? I feel like Modern Warfare has danced on this, and sometimes lawyers do get involved. Is there a line of realism for video games? I know my thoughts, but you go first, please.
I mean, there's a line. It's different for everybody, right? Obviously there is no hard and fast rule, and there can't be. Every person is different. And even when we are talking about, let's say there is a hard and fast rule. Let's say everyone agreed, that would still be an imaginary construct. These games are just trying to they're trying to sell first and foremost, but the people working on them usually want to do something that is eye-catching and maybe makes you feel something. And all those different competing desires are butting against one another, and the thing that comes out of that is a video game that may have some weirdness attached to it. And it's worth criticizing if you feel like it's too touchy. But I think that it's also something that I've really enjoyed engaging with in the last few months, is like the media about Russian conflicts, and then during the pandemic, I watched that Steven Soderbergh movie about pandemics and stuff like that a couple times, because it's like I want like a safe place to play around with, or to think about these ideas and these feelings I'm having. And I don't think that ever gets rid of those feelings. It's not something where it's like I have quenched those desires, but it does help me have a discussion with myself about how I feel about these things. So a nuke going off in a game, I would definitely make sure that people are aware. I think it's completely fair if you know something's in the game and you know it's going to make you feel bad. You should have every right to know that, so you could avoid it if you want. I think that's totally fine. And a lot of content warnings are built specifically in that way. But I don't think that's a reason to ask the developer not to put it in there unless you feel truly like it's abhorrent to you, and then you are free to criticize it.
Yeah. To my way of thinking on this one, Suddy, I think there is not necessarily a line of going too far. I do think you need to make people aware, to Jeff's point, make them aware that it's in the game. But, in how many of our games are we executing just massive amounts of violence, whether it's, taking a golf club to someone's head in The Last of Us, whether it's, seeing people suffer in terms of war and any number of games. I think sometimes, though, we see that sensitivity for American audiences, but not necessarily where a lot of these conflicts take place overseas and whatnot. And so there's a lot of politicization. Man,
Politicization. Yeah, man, that's a tough one.
that is a tough one, right? Especially on a
Yeah.
podcast. But we see that pop up, and that seems to be the conversation. But let's keep in mind that how many of our games require us to execute acts of violence, and the scale of that might be different per person. I mean, thank goodness, our buddy Mr. Badbit from the PlayStation Trophy Room, he talks about Bloodborne all the time, but then he can't kill a dog in a game. Like
Right.
the line is different, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's something that you just get it's okay to bring your stuff to your games that you play, and that's what makes gaming fun. Is it's interactive, and you're supposed to be having an opinion about what's happening in there. And so yeah, I think that it's always worth discussing this stuff. It's always worth when when Call of Duty does pull stuff from the headlines. I mean, it did that with the last game, right? Or maybe that was Modern Warfare 1, where it had the Trail of Tears reference, and it's like, well, this is a crime against humanity that the United States did, and in the game they're going to have the enemies of the United States doing this thing, and that's sort of like, well, that makes me feel weird. Like,
Right.
you're kind of whitewashing this stuff. We can have these conversations. I think that's totally fair. But if it was just about they're doing something violent in a game, most of the time it's probably going to be, well, listen, it's a game, and we can maybe put it into its own little box and say it's not actually hurting anybody. It is pixels at the end of the day. But again, if people want to have the conversation and want to criticize it, I want to hear it.
Same. Well, Jeff, as we wind down, a lot of people wrote in questions for you. Some I haven't mentioned yet. Let's get to those if you don't mind.
Yeah, let's do it.
Put on your leaking hat for this one, because I think a lot of people are desperate for them. This one comes from at Bring Spider-Man. He says, Jeff, do you think it's possible that Microsoft is going to acquire another big publisher after Activision? Is it legally possible? If so, what? WB Games, Focus Home, EA, Ubisoft? Or do you think this will be their last publisher acquisition?
It's not. It's probably not going to be their last publisher acquisition. It might be their last one for a little bit. I think that they will probably slow down in terms of the size, but I think at the same time they will be looking to Europe and to Asia for their next big acquisition. I think that they think they're well covered when it comes to Western studios, and they probably want, and I think they've said as much, that hey, we were kind of looking in these areas a little bit more. And I think part of what Phil Spencer's doing in Japan is building a foundation for having this relationship, so that when they do want to go forward with a big acquisition in Japan, that he has the relationships necessary to even make that viable. So then everyone says, well, then is he buying Sega? Who knows what it's actually going to end up being. I think a couple years ago, Capcom would have made a lot of sense, and then in a post Monster Hunter World Society, no, not so much. But I don't think they're done. I don't think they're done with publishers.
Interesting. Okay, so I see a lot of, from armchair analyst perspective, what they're trying to do is make Xbox more attractive to talent by way of not crunching, by way of
definitely
saying, we're sure, if you want a union, go for it. They're doing a lot of stuff to make it more attractive for talent. And I think after the Activision deal, they perhaps will slow down, and it'll be trying to bring talent in, not necessarily buying the name WB Games or Focus Home or whatever it might be.
That would be way more efficient, especially when it comes to Warner Brothers, because you're not going to be able to get a lot of this IP. So you're not going to buy those studios. That doesn't make any sense. So you would just you pick off the key talent, let them start a new studio. That's a kind of a hassle. So they haven't done a lot of that. And they really want IP, which is why they keep focusing on acquisitions. But if that talent is out there, Microsoft will be out there trying to acquire it through other means. So like you said, just hiring those teams up.
Yeah, I hope that's what happens, at least in a couple cases, because I'm ready to see new talent, better talent, happier talent in the Xbox gaming space to work with so much of the IP that they now have under their umbrella.
Right, exactly.
Let's see. Let's get to a different question. This one comes from the Deadly 81, who was very concerned that you wouldn't get to his question. He says he hopes you're doing well and having a good weekend. He wonders if Disney revealed all of their upcoming Disney original and Pixar games at D23, or are there more unannounced on the docket?
I don't know. I don't know exactly, but my understanding from what I've heard out of that camp is that they have a lot of game deals that they're trying to make, and that applies to Marvel, applies to Star Wars, and I think it applies to Disney as a whole. I think that's one of the big reasons they have John Drake over there, because they want to make they want as many games as possible, because going into the pandemic they didn't, and they were screwed. They were like, hey, we can't have our parks open, no one's going to the movies, all the things we do are hurting. So they did that. They rushed Disney Plus and got that ready to go, but they also looked around and said, what's doing really well right now, and gaming was doing better than anything. So like, listen, we don't know what the next big hurdle to the market's going to be, but clearly we are at a disadvantage if the changes prevent people from being able to gather in public. What can we do to work against it? Well, we want as many games as possible. And are we going to turn into a publisher ourselves? No, we tried that before. We're pretty bad at it. So we are going to be a licensing powerhouse. And I think that there probably almost certainly is a lot more Disney games to come across the board under all their banners, all their IP banners.
My hope is that not too many of them go exclusive. I think a lot of times with Marvel, with superheroes, with Disney, with a lot of these very popular IP, there's an ownership that we all feel about them, and I don't like when one fan base gets locked out. I think in the case of Insomniac, that benefited gamers because, goodness gracious, that game is just so good. With a lot of the Disney stuff, that those IP are just so beloved. We're just seeing the one that just came to Xbox game preview that is very similar to Animal Crossing. I'm COVID branding right now, but people
Yeah, I can't
you know what I'm talking
remember.
about, the farming one that people are loving with IP from Disney.
Yes, Disney Dreamlight Valley.
Thank you so
Yes.
much. Yes, like that stuff's great. I hope those things don't stay exclusive though, because there's an ownership about those characters, and I want more people to have access to them. You know?
Yes, definitely. It's and like, the exclusives don't really benefit any gamers, right? The exclusives only benefit the companies. You being like, well, I get to play it. Well, homie, if it was multi-platform, you get to play it too. What are you talking about? There's no change here. You literally get zero out of this deal. So it would make a lot more sense, or a lot more people would be able to benefit from these games if they were everywhere. So yeah, absolutely.
Agree. I'm going to pace myself here and not do too much else. Stubbs Gaming wants to know, with the great response to the Yakuza franchise being received on Xbox platforms and Game Pass, positive feedback from Sega Sammy, does Jeff think that Yakuza Like a Dragon 2, which I think we have a new name for that one, will launch day and date into Game Pass?
It seems like it'll be pretty close to happening. Those deals always happen at the last minute. I've said this before, and I think if you go back and look at how they get announced, you could kind of see all these things always get announced a couple weeks out, with maybe one or two exceptions. Then the one big exception was like MLB The Show, the second year, where like I think they just re-up the deal or whatever. But it's definitely possible, but the game series is growing and growing fast, and these publishers always sort of want to be like, well, what can we make first before we get the Game Pass money? Because the Game Pass money will be there, we know that. It won't be as much, but maybe we'll make a lot more from going out there. Everyone understands the market that's happening here, and like the forces that are at play. I think I would probably wager against it coming against Game Pass, but I do think it, like, the possibility, the odds are turned up slightly compared to recent years, where it's like, that probably wouldn't happen.
Excellent. I have a question here about Bloodborne. We're an Xbox show, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask it, because too many people are asking about Bloodborne. Yo, what's happening with Bloodborne? Anything?
I think the answer to that is nothing's happening with Bloodborne right now, and I think that the reason for that continues to be that From Software is very busy with Elden Ring, and while Sony could hire someone to come in and work on that, my understanding, and this could be wrong, but my understanding was From Software built that game in such a way that you couldn't just hire a team to go in there and do the work for them. You'd have to work in conjunction with From Software. From Software would have to be there with keys in hand to unlock the doors to the part of the code that is a little bit spaghetti and a little bit messed up, so that they can guide you through it, sort of Sherpa this other team through. And Elden Ring and From Software is just too busy for that right now. Elden Ring was a big project they were working on that was keeping them busy, and now it's the biggest game ever. And building on support and updating it, that's keeping them busy. It's their number one priority. They're just going to keep working on that. And Bloodborne can wait.
I know so many people that are going to be devastated with that news, but at the same time, Elden Ring is such a masterpiece. It's like, how can you be upset? You know?
Yeah, and that doesn't mean it's never going to happen. It's just going to take some time. I think a little bit more time.
Yep. Well, Jeff, the final question was
it.
asked by multiple people. They need to know your hair care regime. They need to know what's going on. Is there a hair care simulator? People, yeah, every time. Todd Oxter writing in wants to know if you're making a hair simulator game. What's your care regimen? Emil wrote this in as well, and I think if I kept scrolling, I think I see 2 more people writing in. What's the deal with the hair, man? What do you do? How do you keep this magic? Are you the number one hair connoisseur in the gaming biz?
Absolutely, that goes without saying. Of course, I still don't do much. Now things have changed. I used to be in Colorado. It's really dry out there. So like using shampoo was like definitely a no-go because it would just dry out my hair even more. Even if I was using conditioner, it would just strip out all the natural stuff you want to like keep it going. Now I'm back in Ohio now, and I'm not only that, I'm like right next to Lake Erie. So it's like really, it's much more humid here, but I'm still trying to see if I could pull that off. I'm still in I'm still in the investigatory period where what's going to happen if I don't use shampoo quite so often. I've used some other stuff in my hair. I'm like using conditioner every once in a while, and I have shampooed a few times, but I'm trying to just sort of do a very tiny little bit in there to like make sure the scalp is nice and clean and ready to go. And then hoping that the hair will just be able to repel, oils and stuff like that through the natural protective stuff that's on there. I don't know if that's if I'm going to be able to pull it off, but I will say that in the last, like when I first moved here, it was like pretty rough. It was getting pretty oily and it was looking pretty bad. In the last couple of weeks, I haven't noticed that as much, and so I'm like, oh, maybe things are going better. So I think I still mostly recommend the no poo method. So try to avoid shampoo if you can.
You have to word it that way.
I have to word it that way. It's legally binding. We are the no poo people, and you will respect and love us. Try it out. It's not for everybody, but a lot of people would probably be much better off in terms of their hair if you didn't use shampoo. So maybe avoid that. And then beyond that, just brush your hair every day, things like that, and clean it if there's something in it or something like that. It really doesn't take that much, even if you have a lot of hair like me.
All right, man. Well, sage words on hair advice from Jeff Grubb. Guys, I know so many of you wrote in questions. Emmett, Bry, so many of you guys, Emil, writing in questions. I'm afraid I don't want to burn too much more of Jeff's time. I want to respect that. But Jeff Grubb, thank you for joining me. Please let people know, if they somehow don't already, where to find you. And if there's anything that you've got coming up that you'd like to point people to, please take a moment and do that.
Yeah, I'm on Giant Bomb. Find me there, giantbomb.com. I'm doing a lot of stuff there all the time. I do a morning show on Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday called Game Mess Mornings, where 11 a.m. Eastern, I go live. We talk about the news of the day and have a conversation. I have a conversation with a guest every day about it, where we just go through the headlines, we discuss it all, and we do some other fun stuff. That's been fantastic. I really, really enjoy doing it, and we've been growing, and the audience that shows up every day for that stuff is fantastic. Of course, it's also on podcast services and all those things. But then other than that, apparently Grand Theft Auto 6 just leaked. A bunch of stuff leaked from that. So I'm going to go look at that stuff and see if there's anything I need to see there. But yeah, that's me.
Amazing. Guys, you can find me on Twitter at InsipidGhost, and of course this show on all your podcast services. If you are willing, please take a moment, rate it the 5 stars, or subscribe, like any of the little things that do so much for a small show like mine. Jeff Grubb, Grand Curator of the Game Mess, I appreciate your time, man. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week, dude.
Thank you, Luke.